This is all going to be said with love, right? I mean,
right.
We're not here to have hate speech. We don't hate anybody. We love everybody.
Right.
Jesus tells us to do that.
Right.
And how do we? I guess we can start out there for a moment. Is it loving to tell people when they're heading in a dangerous path?
You would think it's the most loving thing you could possibly do, just like a doctor telling you have cancer, and that would be a loving thing to do. But what's happening now is the church has this weird worldly idea of compassion, and their version of compassion is, we want to love you, but we don't want to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And you really can't have the same. Jesus came in grace and truth. You have to have both to balance that out in your message. And hey, quite frankly, it is hard sometimes to tell people, hey man, you're heading off a cliff.
Yeah.
You're going to kill yourself. And that's not comfortable, but it needs to be said, obviously. And that's where I think in the Laodicean church, the apostate church, they're not doing that. They're not telling the truth. And they're letting people fall off the cliff. At the same time, loving them straight off the cliff.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but that's the new modus operandi we see going on in the churches, and it's not balanced biblically.
That's for me, is I think, in being a pastor, you're a pastor, is throughout all of ministry, is trying to present, I think of Romans 11:22, consider the goodness and the severity of God. It's a very specific, balanced approach. And we know that if we teach and if we go the other way, we can become legalistic and self-righteous and judgmental. And if we go that way, then it's just some soft message. It reminds me of, I've written a lot on the Screw Tape letters, and one of the things that Lewis writes back in the 40s about this was Screw Tape, the demonic influence was like, we're just going to tell people how wonderful thing is. We're going to love them. We're going to put them in the nursing home. We're going to tell them it's great. No, you're fine. You're healthy. It's wonderful. And in reality, they're riddled with cancer or everything else. That's not love.
No, and here's an interesting thing that I see going on. It's very slick how the devil's doing this. The devil is conflating justification and sanctification together. And you're like, Brandon, how so? What do you mean? Well, here's the message. So you got apostate churches saying, hey, God accepts you and he wants you to come to Jesus Christ. Well, amen. He does.
We agree with that.
We agree with that. And then, okay, they get saved, but then afterwards, the churches are telling them, and stay the way you are. And so it's like, come as you are and stay as you are. And it's conflation that's happening that's very subtle that most people are not picking up on, but it's a way of affirming people in a lifestyle that's killing them. And we know, yes, we're all invited to salvation, but God does not want us to stay the way we are or were. He wants to become more like Christ, and that's not happening. So you have this conflation going on to where if you go after somebody's lifestyle as a believer or whatever and say that's unhealthy, that's going to end in a ditch, oh, you're a hater, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe. And so this is how the Laodicean church is actually playing the game, to where a guy like you and myself, who understands the differences and making those distinctions, have become the bigots now. We're the ones who don't love Jesus and we don't love people. And so this is the game that we're in, and people have to be sharp enough to see how clever Satan is working through the churches. And so this is what's led into a lot of apostasy, morally speaking. And then you have the theological apostasy,
the
doctrinal issues, but then you have the moral issues. And so, like I was mentioning to Gary Stearman on the broadcast, why is it that the Pew Research found that 54% of Christendom approves of gay marriage? What happened there? And it's now we're seeing transgender pastors, pastoresses, whatever you want to call them, in pulpits. We're seeing churches now having drag queen Sunday school hours. And Brandon, what do you mean? I thought that happened in the library. No, it's happening in the church now.
It's in the church.
It's in the church now. And it's spreading. And like every week on my broadcasts, I'm pointing out, okay, this happened here, this happened. It's happening weekly. And so it's like, well, Brandon, you're being hyperbole and you're sensationalizing it.
Exaggerating. No.
It's happening and it's catching wind. And so we have a major problem. And, we talk about Laodicea and it's the rule of the people. It means that instead of the proper authority structure that's going on typically in a church where Christ is the head and then you have the pastors and whatnot, everything's been reversed. where it's the mob now
Yeah.
that's telling the pastors and telling Jesus too, by the way, what we will and will not do and what we will accept and not accept. And so the whole church has been turned upside down in Laodicea. Now, again, don't get me wrong, there's Philadelphia and Smyrna elements that stay true, but as a whole, it's not just happening in America. I talk to people in Australia, I take it in New Zealand, England, Western society, South Africa. It's happening everywhere. It's on a global scale now, Mondo. And so this has broadened my understanding that this is bigger than I thought it was. This is the apostasy that was predicted. I don't know where we go from here, because I know what the society's trying to do. They're trying to make pedophilia legal.
Yeah.
That's the next level. And
bestiality.
They're pushing it. Bestiality.
Yeah. I mean
Spain put out a law about that.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, is that going to be adopted too in the church? Well, they just love, as long as there's love, that's the whole thing.
I think it'd be good to, for those listening, to step back for a minute, because I like to engage with those that are not futurist, in the sense of partial preterists and others. And so if we look at Revelation 2 and 3, and we see the 7 churches, and they're listed in a very specific order. If you were doing exegesis in, let's say, 125 AD of Revelation 2 and 3, there's a very specific exegesis. They're outlined in a very specific way. I know your works, and then the criticism. Do this, do that. Here's my promise, etc. It's very people can look that up. But one of the other aspects that we talk about now is the historical prophetic element. That if you look at church history, you start with Ephesus, the darling church, all the way to Laodicea. That it lists and it correlates with some of the historical periods of the church. Now, in the first century, if you were exegeting the text, you wouldn't know that. Because it hasn't happened yet. But now that we have 2,000 years looking back, we look and go, well, that's uncanny. And so let's talk about the description of the Laodicean church. Maybe we switch from Philadelphia, which oftentimes is called the missionary church. There was a lot of things going on. So let's talk about the era of, let's say, Philadelphia into Laodicea, and what's the distinction, and now how does Laodicea match what we're seeing?
So interesting enough about the historical interpretation of this. Dr. Fruchtenbaum notes this, and I think that was the first time I've been exposed to the understanding of understanding the consecutive order of eras. And what we start seeing, and the evidence behind that, is when you look at the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3, there are promises made, not just to that specific church, but promises made to the churches, plural of all time. Like in the Philadelphia element, I will take you from the hour of trial, which we refer to as the tribulation. Also, the fact that there are rewards given to believers who overcome these certain aspects, and then also penalties that expand across time, not just endemic to that particular church. And so, thank God that we can see that now. Okay, so now we have this Laodicean era. Okay, the last days church, the apostate church. What we see from Philadelphia, and I heard Dr. Walford mention this a long time ago, there's a bleed that follows into Laodicea from Philadelphia, and that this remnant church will be concurrent along with Philadelphia, because it's promised to be taken away at the end. So we see this dragging effect, as Walford used to say. And so now we have a situation going on in the church age where, yes, the Laodicea element has formed, the false church is forming that's going to go into the tribulation, and then you have the remnant church. And there's always been a remnant. And that distinction, Mondo, is becoming crystal clear. Every week we go on, it becomes clearer and clearer, even down as a pastor in the local congregation. I can even see what's happening to the different tests that are happening among my congregation. The bigger the test, it sifts people off.
It does.
It's happening. And so that's where I think when you see both elements, I call it the great separation, and I refer to it in my presentation as referring back to the parable of the wheat and the tares. And this interesting thing about that parable, as everybody knows, wheat and tares grow up together and they look the same until harvest. And at harvest time, the wheat turns a golden brown and bends over. like almost in a humility state.
Mm-hmm. That's the way it should be, right?
Right?
The more mature we are.
Yeah, right? Should be that way. And the darnel or the tear will stick straight up and is this grayish, greenish color, and it sticks straight up in pride.
Mm-hmm.
But you can only tell the difference at harvest time. So my looking at that passage saying, okay, I believe we're in the end times. Am I able now to see the separation? Well, I certainly think I can when I see a drag queen trying to teach the story of Noah to a congregation. Yeah. I think I can tell that one. But it's that obvious. Now, to the people sitting in that church listening to the drag queen teach that, is it that obvious to them? No, they're blinded.
Yeah, they're blinded.
They don't see that. So that's where when you ask that question about the Philadelphia element, there's something else going on. And it's the Philadelphia element that seems to be carrying the water and doing a lot of the work because Laodicea is checked out. So we're watching this. And I think the longer we're here, Mondo, the more that separation is going to become apparent. And I don't know, I've talked to Jan Markell about this. I've talked to Tom Hughes. I've talked to Billy about this. There was a catalyst that happened during the lockdowns.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I can't put my finger on, but something accelerated everything, spiritually speaking. And it's like everything went into hyperdrive. It not only, the situations in Israel or the situation with the World Economic Forum, that happened. But something happened in church. And something spiritual. And it was like I was telling Gary Stearman, why is it that we had conservative pastors go into the lockdowns, take the PP money, right. Which is another issue.
That's right? Another issue.
And stay locked down for a whole year and went on a paid vacation by the government. And then come back and on the first day of church, get up there and say, we all need to apologize for our white privilege. Yeah. We're a bunch of racists. Something spiritually happened by the time of the shutdowns and they reopened. Something happened.
Yeah.
Spiritually speaking. And it just like put everything in full gear. And here we are.
I've pastored in Illinois and Washington State and also in Tahoe. But I remember people from Illinois, I pastored there for like 10 years. So I still know them, love them, good Christian family. And so many times they would, when they're in questions, theological, they'll reach out. Hey, Mondo, what do you think about this? Well, it's interesting. I had one of them who was attending a different church. But she came back and she sent me a video of the church. And I actually know the pastor. But you nailed it. I was shocked because here's a guy that I sat down with. I've sat down and talked with him. And there was some, maybe there wasn't a lot of theological depth there, maybe in his preaching and other things. That he was still preaching the gospel.
Yeah,
okay, so that's good.
Yeah.
But came back and she said, what do you think about this? And he came out and he said, hey, everybody, I think that there's all this stuff going on. And he did say, we need to recognize the difficulty that we have in reaching people because we're white. And I was like,
oh no, there we go.
I go, wait a minute. What did he just say?
Oh,
and so I was able to respond to her and go, hey, look, there's the idea of sin by group, that's racism by right. definition, versus cross back. I go, I said, you need to run as fast as you can, or, first talk to the guy. That I would appreciate if people would talk to me as a pastor. I said, go talk to him, but you need to warn him that buying into this woke garbage is absolutely insanity. And it's one of those things of, you think about, the fallacy of guilt by association, I recognize that. But when you start running the way the world is running, that's scary.
Yeah. It really is. And I think it's demonic because what we see in the world is demonic and now it's entered the church. And then let me add this to that. It wasn't just simply the wokeism. It just wasn't simply, we're a bunch of white racists all of a sudden we need to make reparations. It's when I went down the line on all these issues, Mondo, that I started seeing, wait a second, you used to be pro-Israel and now you're not. Mm-hmm. As an example. So let me give you an example. I get invited to the Israeli consulate in Southern California, and I'm part of the Southern California churches that are pro-Israel, and so we have these periodic meetings with the Israeli consulate. The Israeli consulate asked us a question: what's going on with the evangelicals?
What changed? They
What
noticed
changed?
It. They noticed it.
They noticed it. And they said this. We noticed the evangelical support used to be strong allies of Israel, and it's fading. And it's particularly fading among the young evangelicals.
Yep.
And we had to share with them saying, well, let me tell you what's going on. We got the kids going through seminaries that are not taught Israelology at all. And of course, that coincides with prophecy not being taught, obviously. But they have these gaps in their theological game. And then before you know it, you don't have that understanding of the covenants of Israel or whatever. All of a sudden, they're supporting terrorists. And that Israel is an occupier and Israel is an apartheid state, and just believe the whole lie, hook, line, and sinker. The narrative. And so we saw that. And then that's one front. And then you saw this front. And then we saw this. This is interesting. It's not now what the pastors are saying. It's what they're not saying. And they're staying silent. And so when you force them against the wall, hey, why are you silent on abortion? Why are you silent on gay marriage? Well, here's the thing. I work with other Christian groups in our town that, pro-life and right to life and another organization that helps people get out of the homosexual lesbian lifestyle. I work with them. They say, Brandon, the churches won't even have us anymore.
Yeah, there it is.
And I said, well, why? What did they say to you? Well, abortion's too political, Mondo. That's why we don't talk about abortion. Political?
We're not supposed to talk politics. We're supposed to teach the Bible. You're like, this is a moral issue.
It's a moral issue. If you're not talking about it, I don't know what go sell insurance. Something's wrong with you. And so all these issues now, they're classifying them, to justify this, a political issue. Gay marriage, political issue. The transgender, political issue. And so they're saying, well, we just don't want to talk politics anymore.
See, this is straight out of, this is straight out of the Screw Tape letters. I mean, really, I'm not making it up.
There you go.
Because he talks about putting labels on things and, oh, you're puritanical, or he says confusing with jargon. But here you have a label that's been thrown on. And, he's writing this in 1941. And it's just brilliant to see how it's coming to play. It's like they read the playbook. And one of the things that on this, let's talk about it. Because in your presentation that you gave, which is worth talking about it, I just want to list these out and then let's talk about it, is coming back. Some of the markers of the Laodicean, that this church that has gone apostate. What I put on there was, what I saw was led by fear. And then statism, the LGBTQ, all the letters, environmental creation worship, the gender confusion, worldly philosophies like wokeism. They can't understand prophecy. Love is the deciding factor, the highest marker. Israel as a marker. But let me say this. What I found was, as a leader, as a pastor, that there was tremendous pressure on me to do what the people wanted. And that it goes back to Laodicea, ruled by the people.
Rule of the people.
Because when the whole COVID thing first started, as an example, there was a lot of prognostications and millions are going to die. And so we were like, oh, okay, well, we don't want millions to die. Our congregation's a little bit older. So we decided, okay, we'll take a break, 2 weeks and flatten the curve, right?
Flatten the curve, yes.
So we do this, and then we started realizing, hey, some of the stuff they're saying, isn't backed by the evidence of the data. So we ended up coming back. But I'll tell you what, the pressure from the people who are at home, listening to all the fear on the social media and the rest of the media, are coming going, how can you do this? How would you do that? Why don't you love people? Why don't you care? And I was like, there comes a point where people need to do, if you feel you need to stay at home, stay at home. But the scripture says, do not forsake
the gathering.
Hebrews 10:20. It's a command. So come back. But what I saw was that those, and I had a lot of flack, as maybe you did too. But
we got called the murdering church.
Yes. But it was interesting that what I found was the people themselves in the church, not all of them, there's some good people, but they were putting pressure on the leadership. And the leadership was caving. It's like it's a democracy or something, and going, well, if you're going to be here, we'll just fire you. And you're like, hey,
that's it.
So totally led by fear. They're bringing their views back in. And then instead of leading, the pastors aren't leading anymore.
That's right. And that's the Laodicean rule of the people. You got it. That's a perfect example. And what we're seeing is this is now what's controlling the authority of the churches.
It hasn't stopped.
It hasn't stopped,
Nope.
and it's going further. And I mean, seriously, man, some of these churches, it's a clown show. I mean, it's smoke and light, laser light shows.
Yep.
It's a Las Vegas acrobatic show. I mean, it's off the chain. And you think if the Apostle Paul walked into these places and say, "What did you guys do with the church?"
Yeah.
And so this is where, when you mess up the authority, spiritually speaking, how everything just goes upside down. And so the church is upside down. Now, here's the thing. People will ask, "Well, Brandon, can we recover that?" And I said, "Well, let me show you the words." And I talked to Gary Stearman on the broadcast about this. That word in the Greek about, "I wish you."
Yes.
I wish you. It's a wish, but at the end of it, it's a negative in the Greek, and that I wish, but it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Yep.
So apparently, you go too far in your moral apostasy, your theological apostasy, and your methodology apostasy. You don't come back.
Yeah.
I wish you were, but you're not. That is the scariest thing Messiah could possibly say to a church. You're not coming back. And I can see that. Look on the ground. Everyone can see it. Your church is led by a drag queen pastor now. You're not coming back.
Yeah.
You're done.
How can you?
You
Yep.
can't come back from that. And so what we see in Scripture, there's lines that are drawn. Even in the tribulation, there's a line being drawn. You take the mark of the beast, you
Yep.
ain't coming back.
Point of no
I don't
return.
care what MacArthur says. You ain't coming back.
Right, agreed.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, and the idea then is, how long then is the remnant still going to be here? And what is the job we're doing if they are going over the cliff and not coming back? So we can't rely on them. So what does that mean for guys like you and me and Gary Stearman and Billy Crone and everyone else? What I have noticed is God is forming a coalition of leaders in the remnant church. And he's using these leaders to at least in the North American area, to help the church wake up. And it is happening. People are waking up.
Hopefully in Europe when we're there.
In Europe, yeah, we're going to go to Europe, right? And help them. But I see a new movement of God. And this new movement of God is to use this Philadelphia element to be watchmen, but to help people see what's happening.
Yeah.